We often think that the way we are is the way we have to remain, and it's simply not. Most of what we do each day is just repetition. We're repeating our past behaviors, our past thought patterns, and we can change that with intentionality. My first name is pronounced Rangan.
Rangan.
Like Rangan. So I'm not precious. I just tell people. But if you say Rangan, I won't be offended at all.
I am so bad at pronouncing names.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
No, I feel like because you interact with people over email like so much more.
Yeah.
And then so as a result, you usually it's like the first time you would meet someone, you would hear their name said for the first time. But then if you just interact with someone over email for like years, you just have your own butchered pronunciation of their name in your head.
Yeah, you've even got a butchered interpretation of who that person is. Like you have a perception based upon this two-dimensional communication.
Yeah.
You meet people, you're like, oh, you're completely different.
Yeah.
Like not in a good or bad way, just different.
Well, I realized like I've had relationships with people for like 10 years over email. And then they come and they go like, hi, my name's Tom Smith. And I go, okay. And they're like, no, Tom Smith from the email thing for 10 years. And I'm like, oh yeah, I like forgot you were a person. Like you're just this like thing that pops up in my email and I interact with you, we talk. But then like, I was like, I'm not thinking of you as like out in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when you're like, I'm having to go, oh yeah, that's how your name sounds. And this is who you are. You're not just this like disembodied thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's probably weird, but
it's even like when you see someone and how they appear on social media.
Yeah.
And you get a certain impression of who that person is. And then you meet them in real life. And sometimes I've met people where I felt online they're quite combative and argumentative.
Yeah.
And in real life, they're just really nice and human and kind and compassionate. I've had that quite a lot, which makes me think the online world is so different from the offline world.
Yes. Well, I find that to be not a complimentary thing to say about someone. I think if your online persona is combative and like aggressive or unkind, and then you're like, and then they're so nice in person. I'm like, well, then why are you professionally being an asshole?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I thought you'd be standoffish and you're much nicer and funnier or whatever. That's different. But like, there is something I think about the algorithmic world where it really brings out the worst in people.
Agreed.
And some people are okay with doing that professionally. I don't want to be my worst self professionally. That seems weird.
No, I agree. And I'm very intentional as much as I can when I go online, because I would like my online persona to reflect my offline one. And I'd like to think by and large it does. You know, I kind of feel that I'm a pretty kind and compassionate guy. I don't really crave disagreement, or I don't need people to like me anymore. I don't want to make other people wrong. I just want to put my message out to the world in a kind and compassionate way. For me, one thing I've tried to do online is if I'm ever not feeling in a good place, or I feel that I've emotionally reacted to something, I know now, don't respond.
Yeah, sure.
This is not the time to comment in a public forum. Sort your own emotions out first before you engage, if you choose to engage. And frankly, that's a good lesson that applies online and offline.
Yeah, there's something it seems even about like the sort of doctor world, the doctor personalities, where it becomes the algorithm, like when you see where they started to where they end up, it's not always a good trajectory.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I guess it's true for all things, but it's just fascinating to watch the work that the algorithm and fame and being a personality can do on a human being.
Yeah,
I've
seen that loads. And, you know, you said before it's not complimentary. And I get that. At the same time, I think unless you're really intentional about how you live each day, a lot of influencers end up playing to the algorithm.
Yeah.
So they end up playing to what they know is going to do well, which, as I'm sure you've said multiple times on this podcast, drives you to perhaps not being the person who you want to be.
Yeah.
And so I think for influencers, let's say, but frankly, it applies to everyone, I think you can, let's say with the practice of journaling each morning, you can reflect a little bit and decide intentionally, how do I want to show up today in the world?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, also, you should be making what you think is good, not what the algorithm says is good. Now, obviously, with anything that depends on an audience, you have to be aware of the audience. But I generally think like stats should not be your compass, just like money should not be your compass in life.
Do you think, I think about this a lot, do you think at all it's easy to have that viewpoint? Because I share that viewpoint once you've had a degree of success.
Sure.
Because I think people might go, yeah, Ryan, it's all right for you, or Rangan, it's okay for you. You guys are pretty successful, so you can now make decisions from your heart.
Yeah.
Right? But I do think about that. You know, my podcast now, we're coming to 7 years since it started, and we're about to pass 500 episodes. And what I've got really clear on over the years is that the best way I serve my audience is actually not to think about them.
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds a little bit selfish at first, but I don't mean it like that at all. I've learned that if I selfishly choose the guests that I really, really want to speak to, that's how I best serve my audience. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of what Rick Rubin says in his book, isn't it? In terms of you can't make the best art with the audience in mind.
But it's funny because you said, you know, it's easy to say because you have an audience. But I think, like, why do you have an audience?
Yeah.
Like when I went to my publisher and said, hey, I want to write about an obscure school of ancient philosophy, they were not like, that sounds like the greatest idea ever. Yeah. Like almost every person who has an audience did so
because they followed their heart.
Yeah, they invented that audience,
yeah.
right? They were uniquely themselves. Very few people sort of backed themselves into an audience by doing what everyone else was doing or by following the algorithm. So it's this kind of weird thing. Like there's a famous Henry Ford quote where he says, you know, if I did what my customers wanted, I would have just made a faster horse. You know, like you get where you got by doing something new. You obviously have to have empathy and understanding, and you have to. I thought a lot about how do I make ancient philosophy interesting to people who are not interested in it, but I was operating by my own interests and following my heart, in that I thought it could be made interesting, right? So it's like I have a good sense of my own judgment, and yeah, like you can't operate in total disavowal of the audience or in actively antagonizing the audience. But if you are trying to tell people what you want to hear, what they want to hear, I think that gets very old very quickly.
Yeah, I think there's a danger also in becoming successful and having an audience, in the sense that, and I've seen this with many people, is that you start playing to that audience. You try and conserve what you have, and I think that's a real problem. And actually, with this book, my sixth one, I actually had long chats with Penguin. I said, guys, this is going to be a different book, okay? And there was a little pushback in the sense that, of course, you know, in the UK, I have very successful books, and for Penguin, I'm not having a go at them. There's going to be a conservatism where we want to play to that audience. We know what your audience like, but I've really followed my heart, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to repeat what I've already said. I have to break new grounds. I have to go into new spaces, and I want you guys to back me. Yeah. And they've been amazing. So yeah, we'll back you. And I said, I want everything about this book to be different, because it feels like I'm now bridging the gap from sort of a more traditional health book into a book that's a bit more about philosophy and, you know, happiness and how these things all weave together.
But it's funny. I mean, it's the exact same size. You know, like, so you find the areas that you change, like that you're gonna reinvent or experiment, and then you also want to find a way that it's palatable and doesn't. You know what I mean? You don't throw everything out.
No.
You don't. It's not a giant middle finger to the audience. You still think about what's going on with them, what their needs are, what's interested, but you're looking for the overlap between what's exciting to you and what is gonna resonate with people. And that's different than, oh, X, Y, and Z is doing well right now, so I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, and the truth is, I don't know how interesting this is to people, but I know in this kind of online influencer, author, podcaster world, I know full well that some people are literally choosing their guests based upon how they're going to perform on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to not judge anymore. It's one thing that I've realized in my life. It doesn't help me, right?
Sure.
So I just observe and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Choosing guests like that is going to have a certain outcome. There's going to be a consequence. The question for that individual or those individuals is, am I happy with that consequence? Am I happy with that outcome? And for me, I've realized, no, if I only choose based upon how it's going to perform, then I'm kind of losing my soul along the way.
Totally.
And I was with a mutual friend of ours, Rick Troll, last week. We were chatting about the same thing, about how do we go about choosing the guests who we want to speak to. And this actually, it's not just for people who've got big audiences, right? We all have a circle of influence in our lives. It's how you interact in everyday life. How do you make choices? In my previous book, I had this framework for happiness, and I said there's 3 ingredients to happiness: alignment, contentment, and control. Each one of those is not enough in isolation. They're all important, and you need balance between those 3. And I think what we're talking about speaks to that alignment piece, right? Which is, when I say alignment, I mean when the person who you really are on the inside and the person who you are being on the outside are one and the same. So when your inner values and your external actions start to match up more and more, I think at any point in our life when we start to create a void there and a gap between who we are and who we are being in the world, that will come to bite you at some point. Totally. I really believe in that void that we create, there's a fracture internally. And I believe, having been a doctor for 23 years, that a lot of the problems that we see to do with, let's say, our lifestyle and the habits that we're trying to change, I actually think that if you go to the root cause, when there's that internal fracture in who you are, you will put in things like sugar and alcohol and online scrolling for 3 hours or pornography, whatever it is. It's there
in the cracks
to fill that hole.
Yeah, I in my first book, I riffed a little bit on this word disintegrated. So when we think when you hear the word disintegrate in English, you think it means like coming apart, right? Like it disintegrated upon entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah.
But like if you think about it more as disintegrated, like not integrated.
Yeah.
I find that's the state that a lot of people exist in. So you have different parts of yourself and they're not integrated with each other. So you might have a set of values, like this is how I was in my 20s. You have a set of values, you have what you think is important, who you want to be, and then you have your job, which is maybe in an industry, or it's being done in a way, or it's forcing you to perform in a way that is not, those things are not integrated, right? The other word for this is compartmentalization. But you can't really compartmentalize, right? You just have these different things, and eventually they find some way to conflict, or you have to find some way to reconcile them. And so I think a lot of people, particularly in something like sort of the internet ecosystem where you're like, if I have this person on, it will get a lot of engagement. It might not be true. It might be bad for the world. They might be a crazy person who's spreading a harmful message, but I have to get a certain... So I think you see that, and then what happens is those people tend to spiral because they have that person on, they engage with this sort of energy, and it does so well that it becomes harder and harder for them not to do more and more of that, and then you kind of watch that person almost get radicalized by the people they bring into their circle.
And we see it, and so I used to be driven a lot by external validation as a kid, as a teenager, in my 20s, and over the last 5 or 10 years I've really changed that by intentionally doing daily practices to change how I show up in the world, to change how I see myself, to change my external actions. And I kind of feel that a lot of us, because we have this reliance, this over-reliance on being liked by other people, we start to change who we are in order to be accepted by others. But that's very, very dangerous because, and I think the online world magnifies this to a great degree. You can change who you are and get validation. So then you start performing in life rather than living authentically. You perform and you get rewarded for that performance. So you keep doing that. But again, you're creating this internal void. And I think it's better, the truth is, it's better to be yourself and not be liked by some people, but be authentic to yourself in the long term. And frankly, in the short term, you're going to feel better. You're going to find there's a contentment, there's a peace. And in terms of like this idea of making changes that actually last, I think it's going to be much more likely when you're actually becoming much more aligned with who you are.
Well, I think I've been thinking about this with this idea of virtue. Like, we tend to think of virtue or who we are as this thing. This like, I'm a good person, I'm a generous person, I'm whatever. We think it's this thing that we are as opposed to this thing that we do.
Exactly.
Right? And Aristotle was very clear that virtue was an action, not like a state of being, that it's a verb and not a noun.
Yeah, love it.
And so people will say, well, I'm a good person, but this is what I do professionally, or this is what I believe, but I'm going to engage with or interact or platform all these things that I don't really believe. That's not how it works. As you're trafficking in this stuff, as you're engaging it, as you're doing this thing because it's what the algorithm wants or what you think your boss wants or just how this industry operates, you are becoming that thing, and you're becoming not the thing that you see yourself as or believe that you are, because you're not doing that thing. And so the idea is like, if you want to be something, if you want to see yourself a certain way, it has to be rooted in the actions that you take, the day-to-dayness, which the good news is it means you can change positively also. You can just start doing that thing. It's like not faking it till you make it. It's bringing it into being by doing it.
Yeah. So I start each day with several practices as part of a morning routine. Okay. And one of the things I do at the end is a journaling practice where I answer 3 questions, right? Which I'll share in just a moment. But going back to what I said about happiness before, and this kind of deep, what I call core happiness as opposed to junk happiness, the happiness that I think we're all really looking for, not the happiness that we might think we're looking for.
Yeah, but not the happiness of smiling or laughing,
exactly.
but of contentment and self-fulfillment.
Yeah, exactly. And so those 3 ingredients that I mentioned, alignment, contentment, and control, I think they're all important. They're all equally important to me. But that control one, I think, is really, really important, particularly in the world in which we live today. When I say control, I'm talking about a sense of control. Yeah. I'm not talking about controlling the external world, which is fundamentally, in so many ways, uncontrollable. And a lot of people, I think, get really frustrated and disempowered by the state of the world, politics, the news headlines, whatever it might be. And I understand that, but there are ways around that. And giving yourself a sense of control each day through your actions is a very powerful way to ground yourself and insulate you. And we know from the scientific research, people who have a strong sense of control over their lives, they're happier, they're healthier, they have better social relationships, they earn more money. There's a very strong relationship. So I have been teaching my patients for years about little 5, 10, 15-minute rituals that they can do each morning that helps to ground them. And even when I'm in America now, I'm traveling on this book tour. I've been in LA for 10 days. I'm in Austin for a couple of days. I bring a few things with me, like my coffee pot and my cafetiere. So I make coffee in the hotel room. And in the 5 minutes that it brews, I do a little strength workout in my pajamas. It's something I do at home. And it sounds simple and it sounds a bit unnecessary, but it actually is very helpful for me because it's a grounding practice that helps me feel, I've got a sense of control over my day.
Right.
So those 3 questions that I ask myself each day, I think really speak to your point, which is this idea that justice, virtue, being the person you want to be is an action, right? So I start off with my coffee. And the first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? Okay, really simple question. There's a lot of science on gratitude in terms of what it can do and, humans have this negativity bias that's kept us alive for many, many years. Yeah. But the truth is that we take in 9 bits of negative information for every 1 bit of positive information. So I say to a lot of my patients that you do have a morning routine. Even if you think you don't, the question is, are you intentional about it, right? If you wake up and in bed you scroll the news and Twitter and your work emails, you're entitled to do that, but it's going to have a consequence. If you infuse your brain with negativity first thing in the morning, is it any wonder that half an hour later you're a bit negative about the world, you're a bit reactive with your children or your partner, right? I'm not saying that's the only thing, but if you put that input in first thing, of course, the output 30 minutes later, 1 hour later, is going to be hugely dependent on what you put in. So instead, if you, let's say, start off with this practice of gratitude, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? It changes the focus. And it's so simple. I can never say I don't have time to write that down. And I really challenge anyone, and I'm sure your audience, Ryan, are already familiar with journaling. And I'm sure much of your audience already are doing a journaling practice, right? But hopefully these 3 questions might give them a bit of... What's the
third question?
So the first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? The second question is, what is the most important thing I have to do today? Which I love. It's probably my favorite question. And the third question is, what is one the third question is, which quality do I want to showcase to the world today? And I tell you, those 3 questions are so simple, but they really change your relationship with your day and your relationship with yourself, right? So that second question, what is the most important thing I have to do today? It's incredibly powerful, because what I would see with patients, and I've experienced myself, is that these days, we often only do the important things when everything else is done.
But after you've sucked out all the energy and
but our to-do lists are never done. Right? And I've been heavily influenced by these regrets of the dying over the past few years. And I had a beautiful conversation with Bronnie Ware, the palliative care nurse, on my podcast maybe 3 years ago. And she wrote the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And, she basically said at the end of people's lives, they all say the same things. I wish I'd worked less. I wish I spent more time with my friends and family. I wish I'd lived my life and not the life that other people expected of me, etc., right? So for me, it's like, okay, that's what people say at the end of their lives, commonly. I've also, with my clinical experience, seen many, many patients who kept thinking they could push through, work through evenings, work through weekends. And for many years, I would kind of see a lot of autoimmune disease. And in over 95% of cases, when you do a detailed history of their lives, you would see within the 6 months leading up to the diagnosis, heavy stress. I'm not saying it was the only cause, but a huge contributor to the onset of symptoms. And so I think, well, what is it about us as humans that we have to get sick before we start addressing the reality of life, or we have to wait till our deathbed to affect the reality of life? So for me, that question is a very simple way of focusing my attention on what is the most important thing I have to do today in a world where there are infinite things that we feel we have to do. And I think you may already know this, Ryan, given sort of all the research you've done over the years, but I learned from Greg McKeown a few years ago that when the word priority came into the English language in the 1500s, that it was only a singular word. Like it didn't exist in its plural form.
Is funny. Yes, sure.
And so I think many of us are drowning in our to-do lists. And that question just cuts through all the noise and goes, what is the most important thing I have to do today? So in the week before I left for America, as I knew I was going to be away for 2 weeks, which is quite a long time for me to be away from my wife and kids.
I was just gone for 2 weeks.
It's the longest I've been away from them in a long time, okay? So I remember on the Monday of that week, when I was answering that morning question, it was a work deadline, right? So that's what I put down. I wrote down, I've got to get this blog back to Penguin that they need for the book, right? That doesn't mean that my relationship with my wife wasn't important that day, or my kids, or my other work. No, but the focus that day was, that's the most important thing I have to get done. On the Tuesday in the morning, again, this takes minutes to do, it was, you know what, my wife was away at the weekend. I'm going to be away for 2 weeks. I must make sure when the children are in bed that I spend some quality time with my wife. On the Wednesday, I remember clearly because I was working from home that day. And I thought to myself, and this is what I commonly put down on working from home days. I put down at 4 p.m. when the children walk through the door from school, the most important thing I have to do today is make sure my laptop is shut and my phone's in a different room so I can be fully present with what they have to tell me.
Right.
So it's a very simple question that just helps me focus each day on, actually, you know what? That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. And I would challenge, Ryan, your audience and say, listen, if there's nothing else you take from this conversation, but just answer that one question each day, and you then act on what you write down, it is inconceivable to me that your life will not feel different in 7 days.
One thing I would add to that, obviously some of them are more personal than professional, but like whatever your important professional thing is that you have to do that day, the thing I add to that is one of my sort of rules is I do the hard thing first.
Exactly.
So the problem is people say, like, let's say you have to write something, you have to review something, you have to sit down and go through some, bit of paperwork. You have to have, you're not going to bring your best self to that task at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
You have to do it like if from what I understand the studies that sort of willpower and concentration, these are like finite resources that we have. You have to bring your freshest self to that thing. And so for me, it's usually like, hey, what is the writing thing I have to do? Because that's my job. I don't schedule breakfast meetings and podcasts and running to the DMV. I don't schedule administrative bullshit before I have to do the hard concentration heavy task first. I do that first. So then it's the other thing is when you have hey, what's the most important thing I have to do today, professionally, personally, whatever. If you do that thing, you won the day.
Yeah,
and how
exactly.
many people win their days? Very few people. So by lowering the stakes, by making it about the one thing, the main thing, then you not only, it's reasonable you're going to do it, but then you build the identity and the sense of momentum that you're just like, and several days in a row, I'm fucking crushing it.
Momentum's the key force, right? That's the key underlying energy behind any of this long-term change that we're all looking for. And connecting this to what we said earlier about the negativity bias, there are always things for most of us that we haven't done.
Yeah.
Right? So your brain is hardwired at the end of it. Oh God, I didn't get that done. I didn't get that done. I didn't get that done. Okay. You need to do something. You need to take action each day in some way to sort of insulate yourself against that. There are always going to be things that you don't do.
Yeah.
But you identify the one thing, you do it, and it means you start to change your relationship with yourself because you start to feel like, yeah, I'm a winner. Like I'm winning each day.
And when you having those little practices, hey, this is what I do while the coffee's being made, those are small wins that you're front loading your day with that really like nothing can, it's very unlikely that the day's going to be so haywire that from the second you woke up, you didn't have 5 minutes to do push-ups or 5 minutes to do this gratitude practice. By making it small and simple and entirely in your control, then again, you can give up on the momentum, but no one can take it from you.
Yeah, and this works on so many levels. Let me just finish on that third question, and then I want to explain why I feel that these 5-minute practices are so powerful. Yes, I've experienced it myself. I've seen it with patients year after year, even patients in the depth, suicidal patients. If you can, for some of them, help them with these 5-minute actions each day, you build momentum, you build self-esteem, they change the way that they view themselves. That third question, which quality do I want to showcase to the world today? What I love about that is we often think that the way we are is the way we have to remain. And it's simply not. Most of what we do each day is just repetition. We're repeating our past behaviors, our past thought patterns, and we can change that with intentionality. So for me in the morning, if I spend a minute going, what quality do I want to showcase to the world today? Okay, like today, when I wrote it in my journal, it was compassion. I want to show the world today the quality of compassion. That means I'm just that little bit more likely when I come across maybe an email that I don't like from my team or someone who pulls in front of me if I'm driving or whatever it might be, yes, I could react. But the fact that I've said this morning, I want to show the world the quality of compassion, it makes it a little bit more likely that I'm not going to react. Now, the power isn't doing it once. You do that every single morning for 7 days, for 14 days, for 21 days. You start to change the person who you are. You become, I would argue, more aligned with the person you want to be, because the truth is, yes, we're all different, but there's some really good psychological research showing that actually, when we're kind and compassionate and we practice and show patience, we just feel better about ourselves.
Sure.
We do improve our self-esteem. That's who we ultimately are. I believe underneath all the societal conditioning, underneath what the algorithm is driving people to do, like you were mentioning earlier, I think we all feel better when we're kind and compassionate. So I love those 3 questions, and I've shared them with my patients over the years. I've shared them with my Instagram audience, my podcast audience. And the feedback I consistently get is that they really, really help. Now, you don't have to do those 3. You might have a better version, or in your journals, Ryan, you've got other options for people, but do something.
Sure.
Right? Do something. And just bringing in the science of behavior change for a minute, because I think it really adds to what we're talking about. I do several things each morning in my ideal morning, okay? Yeah. I have a framework called the 3 M's: mindfulness, movement, and mindset. Okay, and the journaling practice, those 3 questions come under the mindset piece for me,
sure.
Right? But the one thing I haven't missed in probably 5 years now, that's rarely been a day, is my 5-minute strength workout every morning. And it's got nothing to do with willpower.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing to do with willpower. I apply the same principles that we all apply to brush our teeth every day to have a 5-minute strength workout. If people go, what's 5 minutes going to do? It does a lot. It's momentum. It makes me feel that even if my life is super busy and my wife needs me and my children need me and my team members need me and my patients need me, I still found 5 minutes for myself. And what I do is the 2 most important rules for any behavior, in my view, are: number 1, make it easy.
Yeah.
Number 2, you stick on that behavior onto an existing habit. Right? So I make it easy by making it 5 minutes. I can never say I don't have 5 minutes. Right? I'm in my pajamas when I do it, so I don't have to get changed or anything fancy.
You don't have to go somewhere.
And in my kitchen at home, I have a dumbbell, I have a kettlebell. That they are in the kitchen. Yes, a few years ago, my wife said, "Hey, baby, you gonna keep this stuff in the kitchen?" I was like, yeah, it's going to stay in the kitchen, because if it goes in the garage or the cupboard, it's not going to get used. Yeah. And the funny thing now is that my kids use it. She uses it, right? So you make it easy. And number 2, you stick it onto an existing habit. So what is that? A habit is an action that you do without conscious thoughts, right? So my coffee is going to get made at 5:30. I don't need my assistant to phone me to remind me. Yeah. I don't need a Google Calendar notification. It's going to happen, right? So by sticking on the workout there, it happens, but it's the same thing that we do with toothbrushing. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's so small and simple. And again, that's the kind of stuff I've had so many patients over the years with depression, with bad anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And yes, there are many things that you might have to look at.
Sure.
So I'm not trying to oversimplify, but
how do you get movement going in the right direction?
Exactly. Yeah. And that for me is one of the best ways to do it.
What do you think about New Year's resolutions? Because I think when people are thinking about change, they're like, I want to be a different person in 2025, or I want to be a better person. I want to be closer to the person I know I'm capable of being. How do you think about resolutions? Because the reality is a lot of people have that sensation, that feeling, that desire, and then most resolutions go nowhere and people spend another year as exactly the same person.
I mean, I spent a long time thinking about this, because why is it that, depending which research study you read, 80 to 90% of New Year's resolutions have fallen by the wayside by the start of February, right? Okay. And I've got 23 years of clinical experience. So I've seen tens of thousands of patients. So I kind of feel I've got a good steer, certainly from my own experience and what I've seen. I think there's a few things that people get wrong, okay? I think they try and make it too big too quickly, which I have seen people do that.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the people who can transform their lives overnight, they've generally had some really, really big life experience, a divorce, a bereavement, they've lost their house, something big. Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that driving you, I think if you make it too big, you're never going to make it last in the long term. Right.
Sure.
So there's a couple of things to say about these resolutions, right? So one thing I don't think people understand enough is that every single behavior in our life serves a role. Too often we try and change the behavior without understanding the role it plays in our life. So I'll give you a really practical example. If your alcohol consumption is your way of managing stress, right, you can white knuckle it for the first 2 or 3 weeks of January and you will stop.
Yeah.
And you'll think, I've got more energy, I'm sleeping better. Great. I have no problem with that. But if it's your way of managing stress, the only way you'll change it in the long term is by one of two things. Either the amount of stress in your life has to change, so then you'll no longer need the alcohol, or you need an alternative behavior to alcohol to help you manage the stress. Sure. It sounds so obvious, Ryan, when I put it like that. But most people, in my experience, are caught up in their lives and they're focused too much on the behavior instead of being focused on what role does behavior play. And so I've come to the conclusion that, and this is really one of the primary theses in Make Change That Lasts, my new book, is this idea that it's not necessarily the behavior you need to focus on, it's the energy behind the behavior.
What's it doing for you? Why are you doing it? Yeah.
And the other way I look at it for New Year's resolutions is all behaviors, I believe, come from either love or fear, right? At their core.
Sure.
So if you feel bad about who you are, you're consumed with guilt and shame and jealousy and envy, or whatever it might be. These are all things that come from the energy of fear. If your changes are coming from that kind of energy, I don't think they're going to last in the long term, because you're trying to overcome, like, the behavior is in conflict with who you consider yourself to be.
Right.
This was me a few years ago, right? So I would say, right, this year I'm going to meditate, and I'd do 20 minutes of meditation every morning until like the 16th of January. Then I'll miss a day because work gets busy, and I'd beat myself up in my head with negative self-talk. I'd be, Rangan, you couldn't do it, could you, this year? You know, you're a loser. You couldn't. I used to have a really negative inner voice. I've completely changed that over the years with these kind of intentional practices. And now I find behavior change really, really simple, because I've focused on the underlying energies behind that behavior change.
Right.
And I think one of the things I try to kind of address in this book, Ryan, is I'm a doctor, right? So through the lens of health, I think we're living in a world where we've got more information than ever before. More health podcasts, more health books, more blogs, whatever it might be. But why, despite all this increase in information and knowledge, is it not translating to better health outcomes?
Right. We know what we should. Most of us know what we should do or not do.
Exactly. So, I really tried hard with this, but it's going, no. There's a lot of what we should be doing out there. I've written books on what we should be doing.
Right.
This book addresses the why. Why are we still doing the things that we know are harming us?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is internal. It comes to our internal world.
Yeah.
And people don't want to go there, but that's where the gold is.
It's funny. So every year for Daily Stoic, we do this thing we call it the Daily Stoic New Year Challenge. So it's like 21 days of like Stoic inspired challenges. It's different every year, but it's just a bunch of like cool Stoic practices. And the idea is like one or two will stick with someone and they'll take it through the year. Or one will get them to think about something differently. But it's funny, like we'll start talking about it in early December. The first day you announce it, a bunch of people sign up. Second time you announce, a bunch of people sign up. And then it sort of dips, and then it starts on January 1st. But like the second biggest sign up day is always like January 2nd. So like people want to change, like at some level they heard about this, they want to change. And then what we do, I think this is the most insidious part of what gets in the way of so much of what we're capable of doing, is we go, okay, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Yeah. They go, okay, that starts on January 1st. So That's a couple weeks from now. So in a couple weeks from now, I'll get serious about thinking about signing up.
Yeah.
And then I'll miss that, like, which is the Stoics talk about how we know what we need to do, but then we tell ourselves this huge lie, which is like, I'll do it in the morning. I'll do it after this. I'll do it when things calm down. By just moving the timeline up a little bit, we let ourselves off the hook, and then most of us don't do it.
I completely agree. It's what I've seen in patients for years. It's always next week or next Monday or next month. But
when the kids are older.
Yeah, it starts today. So another 5-minute practice I try and do each day is what my wife and I call the 5-minute tea ritual. Right? So like many people, if you're not intentional about it, you can live in the same house, but you get so busy with work and the children, and you're like passing ships.
Yeah.
Right? So a few years ago, we decided, life gets busy from time to time, but we really need to intentionally focus on our relationship. So we have this practice called the 5-minute tea ritual. Every night when the kids were younger, and we still try and do it now, when they've gone to bed, before we do anything else, we come to the kitchen, we make a pot of mint tea, so non-caffeinated, and it's not the rule, the practice is that for 5 minutes, we catch up.
Yeah.
Right? So it's only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's the requirement. So we're just going to ask each other about our days.
Right. Instead of, we got to get a babysitter, we're going to book a restaurant reservation.
Exactly.
You make it too big, and then you're like, we can't do it this way.
Yeah, and it's like, before you know it, it's a few months before you did anything. And what's really interesting is, and I think this builds on this 5-minute action each day principle that we're talking about. It's not that some days those 5 minutes don't become 30 minutes or an hour.
Probably more often than not.
More often than not, they do, because it's actually, this is much more fun than going on Netflix or YouTube, whatever it might be. It's like, this is why I married you, right? We actually want to spend time together.
Wait, we like each other? Yeah.
Yeah. But some days, one of us will say, actually, it's just going to be 5 minutes a day. Like, I've actually got a few emails to do or whatever it might be. Whenever we've felt, either one of us, that, we're too busy, and it's been a few days without that practice, it's really interesting. You can feel it in our relationship, the niggles, the small things start to bother us. There's less intimacy, there's less connection. Right. But when we are quite disciplined about the 5-minute tea ritual, everything else in our relationship, and therefore our lives and our health, starts to get better.
Right.
And so I'm a huge fan of these small things that we do consistently. I have found time and time again with me and with thousands of my patients, these are the things that I think move the needle for most people.
I mean, there's a writing rule of 2 crappy pages a day.
Yeah.
And it seems like the opposite of how you would get good writing, to set a goal to do bad writing. But what it's doing is it's dramatically lowering the stakes. It's making it attainable. And it's actually hard to do crappy pages. So you're just, but the idea is, you got to do crappy pages and to do great pages. They share one similarity, which is that you have to show up and start. And so by lowering the stakes, you can create the room to create positive momentum. And then the other thing, which I think is a rule we don't, or I guess a fact of life we don't talk about enough, which is that I think quantity is a way to get to quality.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's say every day for a month you sit down with your spouse and you have 5 minutes. A lot of those are going to be 5 minutes of nothingness, but one of those or a handful of those are really going to be significant, which you only could have had by having the larger number, right? Like, and so the more you sit down and do the thing, what you're doing is increasing your chances of having those really transcendent days.
Yeah.
And so, but people focus on, like, you know what, like for writing, they're like, I'm going to rent a cabin, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to have 2 great weeks in a row. No, you're not. First off, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then second, like, you're going to have 5 of those days be crappy. And as a result, like, you're not going to return with the things that you needed. So it's more about the day-to-dayness, the consistency, and the quantity that gets you.
You see this with health, right? So let's use the example of working out, which is a desire that many people have at all times, but particularly at the new year, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I want to move my body more. I'm spending too much time at the desk. People start to get paralyzed with choice, right? Oh, what? I'm going to run, I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to do Pilates, I'm going to, what is that I'm going to do? And I've had patients before where they've literally got angina pains in their heart. We talk about physical activity. A month later, they're still coming back saying, hey, doctor, I can't decide which one to do, right? And I understand that. I have sympathy. But the point is, frankly, any of them are going to help you.
Just walked here and that would have
helped you. And so through the lens of my 5-minute strength workout, people say, what, do you do the same thing every day? Actually, for many years I did.
Yeah.
Because if you have to decide every morning, oh, what am I going to do today? That's procrastination. That's choice. That leads to indecision and inaction. And we know this in business, right? In the business world. When Amazon moved to one-click ordering about 10 years ago or so, estimates say their profits went up by $300 million a year. Because back then, I don't know if you can remember this, but there were 4 or 5 steps to take before you could purchase. You have to confirm order, put in your card details on a news screen. Sure. There's 3 or 4 steps. Each time you have another option, it's a reason that you can pull out of the behavior. And so the reason we brush our teeth each night, well, one of the reasons is because it's the same action every day. We don't go on Tuesday evening, we don't go, you know what, I brushed yesterday.
Yeah.
Let me do something different today. I'm going to floss today. And then on Wednesday, we don't go, I brushed and I'm just going to rinse today. We don't do that. What
if you had to assemble the toothbrush, or you had to unpackage it, if you had to make the toothpaste?
You wouldn't do it.
Yeah, right.
And so that's why my dumbbell and kettlebell lives in my kitchen. My cafetiere is there. It all works together. It is so easy, I can barely not do it.
Yes.
Now, going back to New Year's resolutions, there's another, I think, for me, it's a big idea that I don't think we're talking about enough, right? And I think it is a way of connecting a lot of your writings and practices with health, and I think sometimes people don't see the connection, right? So I believe that a lot of the reason why we can't make changes that last is because we don't understand the internal drivers that are leading us to those practices. So let me give you a really practical example. Let's say someone's trying to cut back on sugar, right? Okay. Which is a lot of people, right?
It's not great.
So you've got the knowledge that too much sugar is affecting your teeth and your liver and your skin and your health, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And you think that just knowing that is all you need to make the change. But most people who are trying to cut back already know that. They don't need another book telling them on the negatives of sugar or the negatives of alcohol. They already know that. So the way we interact with the world massively influences our behaviors. So let me try and give an example. If you are the kind of person who you're driving to work in traffic and another car cuts in front of you, right? You think that you're entitled to react in a certain way. And of course you are entitled to, but if you start making all this mental noise in your head, stupid driver, they shouldn't have a license, and you start screaming at them.
Yeah.
You can do that, but it's going to have a consequence. What people don't realize, Ryan, in my view, is that you are generating emotional stress in that instant by the way you've reacted with an external event.
Yeah.
That emotional stress is not neutral. You have to do something to neutralize that stress. And what usually happens is that you get to work, you could do it in a healthy way and walk around the block. But most people don't. They go to the vending machine, they get a chocolate bar, they get an extra coffee.
The donuts are sitting there.
Yeah, they get the donuts, or they need an extra drink of alcohol after work because they need to soothe the emotional stress that they generated by the way they responded to that event. Now, you can cultivate with practice, and I've had a practice for years since my conversation with Edith Eger on my podcast, right?
The choice.
The choice, yeah.
Like that you chose to interpret it this way and have this feeling about it. That's the definition of Stoicism. It's not events that upset us, it's our opinion about the events.
Exactly. And we can hear this stuff, and people who've read your books will know this. This is a central idea in my new book. But I don't think people are connecting that to their health and their health behaviors. And I can say with my own experience, since I spoke to Edith Eger, and your audience probably know who she is, 93-year-old lady, when I spoke to her a few years ago.
No, you connected me with her.
I did, yeah, over email, I remember. And she was like, when she was 16 years old, shall I just briefly tell the story, or your audience familiar? Out of 500 conversations on my podcast, I would still say this is the one that has impacted me personally the most, right? And that was because, I was ready for that message at that point in my life. Maybe if I'd heard it 10 years earlier, in through one ear, out through the other. But at that point, I was like, oh, I get it now. I can now see life for what it is. Every event in life is essentially neutral. It's my interpretation on that event that determines its outcome. So Edith, when she was 16 years old, growing up in Eastern Europe, she was excited. She was going for a date with her boyfriend that night. She was trying to think about what dress is she going to wear. And her family get a knock on the door. Her sister, her, and her two parents get put on a train to Auschwitz concentration camp, right? Within 2 hours of getting there, both of her parents are murdered. An hour or two later, she, as a 16-year-old girl, gets asked to dance for the senior prison guards. And there's many things from that conversation that have never left me, Ryan. One of the things is what she said to me then. She said, Rangan, I never forgot the final thing my mother said to me. Edith, nobody can ever take from you the contents that you put inside your own mind. And then she says, Rangan, when I was dancing in Auschwitz, I wasn't in Auschwitz. In my mind, I was in Budapest Opera House.
Right.
I had a beautiful dress on. The orchestra was playing. The crowd were cheering. I thought, okay, this is pretty incredible. Then she tells me, whilst I was in Auschwitz, I started to see the prison guards as the prisoners. They weren't free in their mind. I was. And there's much more to that story, right? But I thought this is pretty incredible. And the final thing she said to me, and I kind of feel, Ryan, that you've got these tattoos, right, on your arm. I feel that these words from Edith are internally tattooed onto my soul because they literally changed how I view the world. She said to me, Rangan, I have lived in Auschwitz, and I can tell you the greatest prison you will ever live inside is the prison you create inside your own minds. And Ryan, the penny dropped for me. Like, it literally dropped for me in that moment. Oh my God, we're all creating these stories every day. We're going online. We're taking offense to these posts by other people. We're getting annoyed by the driver or our boss. And we don't realize that we can train ourselves, right? It's a skill that you can cultivate, get better at. You can train yourself to not take offense. There's a whole chapter in this book saying, it's basically don't take offense, right? And I explained the health outcomes and the health benefits for your behaviors. And, what people don't realize is that no event is inherently offensive.
Right.
Because if it was, we'd all be offended to the same comment or the same event. But the fact that
you didn't hear it, you wouldn't be offended either, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like it's registering on the seismic, machines. Like, it's only because you heard it and you decided it meant X, Y, or Z. Like a rude tone does not register in like a recording device.
Exactly.
You can't see. If people look at the audio of this podcast, you can see the sound levels, but you could not tell from the sound levels whether we're having a nice conversation or not nice conversation.
It's an interpretation, so you can train yourself to go, oh, nothing is inherently offensive. Something in me is being lit.
Yeah.
It's been activated by that comment. I wonder what it is. So after that conversation with Edith, I would do a practice maybe for 2 or 3 years. I don't do it anymore because I feel I had to consciously do it. Now it's my unconscious.
Yeah.
Right? It's there. It's my default. Ryan, I'm 47. I can honestly, hand on heart, say I've never felt this good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like, I feel I've got this inner calm these days that I didn't have before. And a lot of it is from these kind of practices. So for a few years, I would basically in the evening, in a journal, I'd write down, where today did you get emotionally triggered? And instead of looking at the outside world and the person who sent the email or the person who left the comment or the driver who drove a certain way, because frankly, if I'm reliant on those things to go well, to feel good, I'm going to be waiting a long time to feel good. I end up being a puppet on a string. I'm just going to be blown around by the actions of others. And I thought, no, that's a very vulnerable place to be in. I don't want to be dependent or overly dependent on the actions of other people.
Right.
And so I would write down, why did that situation bother you?
Yeah.
What was brought up inside of you? Oh, It reminded me of what my mum said to me when I was a kid. Or it reminded me of how my boss treated me, or whatever it might be. Like, both of us, Ryan, we have pretty large public profiles, right? So if we choose to look, we can see a lot of comments on us, good and bads. And in the early days, when my BBC One TV show first came out in 2015, where I went into families' houses and helped them all reverse their conditions using nutrition, lifestyle, and mindsets. Like, when I did that, I'd never experienced public commentary before until that show came out. And whoa, was I not well equipped to handle it, right? No one is. And people say you need to grow a thick skin. I don't think that's necessarily the way I would frame it. I don't think it's about growing a thick skin. I think it's about really being able to emotionally detach yourself from that comment and looking at it rationally. So, for example, I've learned over the years, Ryan, and I'd welcome your perspective on this. I've learned that for me, and I think for many people, that criticism only bothers us to the extent we believe it about ourselves.
Sure. Yeah.
So
if you think it's preposterously off base, it doesn't register.
It doesn't bother you.
It's got to be in the ballpark.
If there's something in it, it's like, maybe they've got a point there. Right. And actually, instead of pushing it away, if they do have a point, and I've had posts before where someone has criticized, and instead of pushing back, I've gone, actually, you know what? They've got a point.
Right.
They've got a point. Next time I post about this topic, I can take a little bit more care.
Sure.
So you can use criticism to learn, or you can go, you know what? I don't see it that way. Like, they've got a completely different perspective on the world. They're entitled to, but I'm very happy with what I've done. I think it's this inner work that the Stoics talk about, that you talk about. I think this is the missing link for our health. I really believe that we're still wanting more external knowledge, right? Sugar, alcohol, what sort of diet should I eat? I'm not saying external knowledge has no value. It does. But it's not enough in and of itself. We need more internal knowledge, more self-reflection, more insight.
No, I think that's an interesting connection, because I think most of my audience would totally buy the connection that, like, if you have an opinion about something that's not up to you, if you've interpreted something negatively, you've chosen the least charitable interpretation, the offensive interpretation, that's going to cause distress or suffering in you. And I think both the Stoics and the Buddhists say this, right?
Exactly.
That our opinions, our expectations, our judgments are the source of our suffering. But I think what you're saying is that it's not just kind of existential spiritual suffering. You're creating a need or an energy that's going to have to find an outlet. That outlet is going to be food or bad habits or addictions or whatever. And yeah, just the idea that, okay, because you interpreted this thing as affecting your value as a human, then when you see some tasty thing that's going to make you feel good as a human, you're going to be much more susceptible to doing that.
I have seen this with so many people, and Ryan, I've really experienced it myself. Like, I a few years ago, I thought, well, why are you still eating a bit too much sugar when you've written 3 Sunday Times bestsellers so far, and each of them at the time, I was writing about the problems with excess sugar, because external knowledge is not in and of itself enough. It's that internal knowledge, right? So you will need an outlet for the emotional stress that you generate. So it's not just about how you feel. It's then about how you act.
Yeah.
But let me give you some research to actually present it from a different perspective. Professor Fred Luskin at Stanford University, he's in charge of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, right? And he has shown with his research that actually, if you are unable to forgive and let go of things that have happened in the past, which is kind of the similar things to what we're talking about, that can have serious health outcomes, right? So he has shown that when he can teach people to forgive, your blood pressure can go down, anxiety can improve, depression can improve, all kinds of things. I've shared research in this book. Gabor Mate has shared research where actually there is ample research showing an association with people who hold on to resentments, can't let go of things, which is a lot of things we're talking about, there's an association between those traits and things like autoimmune disease, things like cancer. Now, I say that very cautiously. I'm not blaming anyone. Right? These things are chronic diseases. There are multiple inputs. There's genetics, there's food, there's stress, there's sleep, there's environmental pollution. but there's also emotional components.
Sure.
Right? So these things are all linked, and we have enough I've got enough clinical experience, and there's enough published research evidence to show us that these things really matter. Because, Ryan, I've been a doctor for 23 years, right? I've already written 5 books before this one, and I wanted to write something fresh. I didn't want to write something that I feel was already out there. Otherwise, what's the point?
Well, sure.
And I thought there's more and more health information out there, but it's not translating to better health. Yes, there are structural reasons for that in society, for sure, but that's the external.
Yeah.
There's also the internal reasons why we're not able to on an individual level. And once you understand the things that you write about so beautifully, and the things that I hope are going to connect with your audience in this book, once you understand that you can actually cultivate a calmer inner world, not only are you going to feel better, you're going to act better with your behaviors as well.
No, I think that makes total sense. Yeah, it's not, your lack of change is not due to a deficiency in raw willpower. It's something deeper than that.
The behavior serves a need.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Want to go check out some books in the bookstore?
I'd love to.
Let's do
I've got to get a couple for my kids as well, for
Let's
sure.
do it.